Hello, my name is Jim Turk, and I'm the director of the Center for Free Expression. I would like to begin our session today by acknowledging that the land on which I'm speaking to you is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also want to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed by multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. On behalf of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University and the co-sponsors for today's panel, and those co-sponsors are the Edmonton Public Library, the Milton Public Library, the Ryerson Young Workers' Rights Hub, Thunder Bay Public Library, the Toronto Public Library, and the Vancouver Public Library. I want to welcome you to the Center for Free Expression's virtual forum series panel on Pressured to be Silent, Workers, COVID, and the Cost for Society. The pandemic has helped highlight a reality faced by many workers in our society, a reality difficult, often harmful, and unsafe working conditions that have consequences for the workers and the public, but also about a reality in which workers face enormous obstacles if they want to speak up, obstacles that should not exist in a truly democratic society and in any egalitarian society. Our panel today knows this reality well, and we'll talk about it, what workers are doing to help ensure their voices can be part of public discourse, and what are some options that will make things better for the future. I'd like to introduce our panel. Our first panelist is Kit Andres. Kit is a migrant farm worker organizer with the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. They live in Niagara region of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territory. Welcome, Kit.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here.
Our second panelist was going to be Syed Hussan. Syed is the executive director of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change and a member of the Migrant Workers Network. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here, but for a very good reason. Yesterday, the Migrant Workers Alliance issued a report that was so telling, I guess, that the Minister of Immigration hastily called a press conference that's happening right now, and Hussan has to be available to respond to that. So it's with deep regret that he cannot be with us as a result of this last minute change. Our third panelist is Gagandeep Kaur. Gagandeep is a postal worker and an organizer for the Warehouse Workers Center since its inception. A strong believer in the power of organizing, supporting, and strengthening workers through education and training, Gagandeep strives to create safer workplaces and to help implement proper health and safety conditions for workers. Welcome, Gagandeep.
Thank you, Jim.
And
glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here as well. Our final panelist is Deena Ladd. Deena is one of the founders and is the executive director of the Toronto Workers Action Centre, which organizes to improve wages and working conditions with low-wage workers, women, racialized and immigrant workers in precarious jobs that face discrimination, violations of rights, and no benefits in the workplace. For the past 29 years, Deena has worked to support and develop grassroots training and organizing through the center and with groups such as Fight for $15 and Fairness Campaign and the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Welcome, Deena.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And the moderator for this panel is Myer Siemiatycki. Myer is Professor Emeritus and former chair in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at Ryerson University. He currently is serving as the coordinator of the Ryerson Young Workers' Rights Hub. Myer holds a PhD in labor history, writes about workers' resistance to adverse conditions, and for many years organized the annual Ryerson Union Fair, designed to familiarize students with labor issues and unions. Welcome, Myer.
Jim, great to be with you.
Now, the format for today's panel discussion is that the panel will engage in a conversation for the next 45 to 55 minutes, following which Myer will turn to the audience for any questions you may have. If you want to look, if each of you would look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. There's also a chat button, which is not does not work in this version of Zoom webinar. But the Q&A button is the way anyone in the audience can ask questions. And I'd encourage you, when the panel is discussing something and a question comes to mind, just go there immediately and write out your question. Don't wait till we get to the question period to put it down, so that as you think about it, you can put the questions into the Q&A mix. That's all from me. Over to you and the panel. Take care and good luck.
Jim, thank you. And you are owed a shout out. Thanks to you and to the Center for Free Expression for organizing this timely and important panel event. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that in a pandemic, workers' freedom of speech is a matter of life and death, not only for workers themselves, but rippling out for their families, communities, indeed for all of us. In this COVID pandemic, the workplace has been the major transmission site of disease. Ground zero for COVID spread has been workplaces of all sorts. That includes factories, warehouses, distribution centers, construction sites, long-term care homes, meatpacking plants, farmers' fields, and many more. Especially vulnerable have been low-paid, racialized, and migrant workers. But as the title of today's session says, many workers are pressured to remain silent about the COVID conditions and risks they face on the job. Workers fear being fired, even deported if they are here as migrant workers. You can find evidence of this in newspaper stories about COVID. The phrase fear of reprisal keeps coming up so often. Journalists will often report that workers were reluctant to speak out or reluctant to provide their full name in discussing workplace conditions for those fears of reprisal. More workers may even feel pressured not to speak out at all, even anonymously. And yet, over the past year, we have had many instances of brave, high-profile examples of workers speaking out publicly to condemn working conditions. So in a pandemic, how important is free expression for workers? Does it currently exist? What can be done to protect and extend it? These are some of the questions we'll be discussing with our panel, and as you've heard, they work very closely with a wide array of frontline workers. So I'll start off by asking each of our panelists to give us their impression of the state of worker apprehension about speaking out about the nature of their working conditions. And maybe, Deena, I'll start with you, because your organization may have the broadest scope of reach to workers in a whole range of different workplaces. So a two-part question. You head up the Workers' Action Center in Toronto, as we've heard. Can you briefly tell us about the center's role and whether pressure on workers to remain silent is something you encounter?
Sure. Thanks, Myer. Yeah, I mean, our center was originally formed and I think has played a critical role during the pandemic to support workers who are non-union in sort of like a huge array of precarious work, temp agency work, factory work, part-time, casual, all the kinds of jobs that one can find on a job board right now. And so our center was created, in various formations. We've been around for about 20 years now. And our purpose is to really also focus on immigrant workers, newcomers, racialized workers, migrant workers, and to be a base by which workers can call us on our emergency hotline, which we operate in 7 languages, and then get assistance to deal with that workplace violation. And so that can be directly taking on that employer, which is most likely the case because for many workers, filing a claim cannot necessarily achieve justice at all in the workplace. So during the pandemic, I mean, our hotline has been sort of ringing off the hook, as I'm sure as Kit and Gagandeep can attest. I think that it's been a really tough year for a lot of workers. And I think that one of the biggest issues that have emerged is how can you keep yourself safe? How can you keep your family safe, your friends safe, your community safe during a pandemic when you have to go to work in a workplace that it doesn't respect your rights, right? And doesn't allow you to speak up and be who you can be. And so this, of course, before the pandemic was not necessarily, nobody really cared, to be honest. I think that, you know, a lot of the workers that the three of us work with are invisible and are not really thought about in people's day-to-day lives. But the pandemic has really shone a focus on these essential, they're called essential jobs now, essential workers and the role that they play. And so for many of us, well, I'll speak for the Workers Action Center. Our job has been to support essential workers during the pandemic to make the best decisions that they can with the very limited options that they have to try to protect themselves. But speaking up around COVID, being able to take on their employer around health and safety issues, being able to speak to the media is something that people take on at great risk to themselves and to their employment. So it's been, so for us, it's been sort of helping to navigate this new level of danger for a lot of workers to speak up and to challenge what's going on in their workplaces and to try and do that safely. But I think that one of the biggest things that we've had working in our favor is the fact that, you know, our organizing strategy is about building relationships and about building a long-term movement to fight these conditions. And so for many of the people that we have connections with, you know, they're not connections that have just happened over the year. They're, you know, been connections that have been happening for many years, which allows that trust and that relationship to support workers to speak up.
Deena, I want to come back before too long to a fuller discussion of the risks that you spoke of that workers have to consider when they want to either speak out or take some kind of action to improve their working conditions. But let's widen the scope here and the lens. Kit Andres, you're with the Migrant Workers Action Center. Can you tell us who we are referring to when we talk about migrant workers? What kind of work do they do? And how does their temporary status in the country impact their latitude and ability to speak out?
Mm-hmm. So at Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, we are a migrant-led organization, which means our leaders and members are migrant workers, including farm workers, migrant care workers. So these are largely women, mainly from the Philippines, but also other countries around the world who come to Canada to take care of our elderly, children, people with disabilities and illnesses. Also international student workers. They work in, you know, restaurants, factories, gig workers, as well as undocumented workers. So we define migrant workers as anyone, any working class person who is in Canada without permanent status. And right now that is 1 in 23 people currently in the country.
Saw a statistic that took me aback that said that in the agricultural sector, 40% of farm workers in Ontario are migrants, are in that temporary status. That's a really high dependency that the country and reliance that the country has on that strata of workers.
Absolutely. And, you know, a lot of the times it's framed as, oh, these people come here to feed Canadians, when the reality is that most of the produce that they are planting, harvesting, is actually being exported at a profit. So these are workers who are being imported for their labor on a temporary status, highly exploited through manufactured vulnerability mechanisms, such as, along with a temporary status, with closed work permits. So when migrant farm workers come to Canada, it actually says their employer's name on their work permit, which means it's illegal for them to work for anyone else. So you can imagine, you know, if you're at a workplace, maybe the conditions aren't so great, but you have to stay there. You can't go to work somewhere else where the conditions are better, the pay is better. Your choice is either to stick with it or go back home. So that's another level. Also, they're living in employer-controlled housing. So if you can imagine, your boss is also your landlord. So when you're having issues at work, that shows up at your housing. When there's issues with your housing, it bleeds over into work. So these are all ways that are designed to create a highly exploitable workforce that is being brought in to make a profit for Canada, not necessarily to put food on our tables, but to export it across the world. So these are factors that lead into, you know, creating those mechanisms of silence.
Kit will be returning to pick up some of those threads that you've importantly identified for us. Gagandeep, if I can turn to you, you are with the Warehouse Workers Centre of Peel Region, which includes the cities of Brampton and Mississauga. You have said publicly that Peel Region, this is a quote, Peel Region is on fire with COVID. Can you help us understand what is happening in Peel Region and why?
So first of all, Myers, I would just like to add a bit that a region of Peel also includes City of Caledon, along with City of Mississauga and Brampton. So yes, that statement that I said publicly is, I would say, absolutely true. Peel region has been in the news, in the media all along in this pandemic. It has made highlights, and the number of cases are on the rise. And there are so many things that have caused it. So I would just like to give you a bit of overview, what is happening in Peel region, even before, I would say, pandemic hit us. So it is one of, I would say, the fastest growing regions in Ontario. The significance of Peel region, it is that it is the freight hub for Canada. So saying that this location of Peel geographically, it is a perfect spot for the national good distribution, because it has all three, I would say, components, the air, the land, as well as the railway infrastructure set in place. So there's, I would say, billions worth of goods travel through, from, and across Peel region every single day. Close to, I would say, 50% of our economy is in this industry, and it employs thousands of workers who have been deemed essential all through this pandemic. And these are the workers who never had the option of working from home. So they were going to work all along. And we know with also this pandemic, the demands of online ordered, home delivered goods have skyrocketed. So what that caused is the warehouse workers, they became busier than ever. The warehouses, whereas other workplaces, they were maybe shutting down, the logistics sector warehouses, they hired hundreds to thousands of more workers to keep up with the demands. And now we know that our region has been under, I would say, the most restrictive lockdown since November 2020. But the test positivity rate in Peel is almost double than the provincial rate. And why is that? Because the people here who live and work in Peel, they are going to work every single day with the bare minimum protection. Whereas government should have supported them all along, that support had been missing. And also not to mention that 63% of Peel's population is of minorities, with Brampton having the highest percentage of South Asian communities. And Kit just mentioned about migrant workers. I would also like to add that Peel region also has the highest percentage of migrant students and migrant workers, who also, just like farm workers, are employed in those jobs where because of their temporary status, they are open to exploitation by the employer. These workers don't know their basic rights. And first of all, that's the big reason. And secondly, they are not in a position to speak up and stand up against those employers, because their employers not only just control their jobs, they control their status in the country. So they know that the immigration system set in place, the workers, they need support of these employers in getting that permanent status. So they basically just, I would say, become puppets, and employers, they just use them in whatever way they want to. So yeah, sure.
No, Gagandeep, I'm sorry to jump in. You've laid out really a powerful and frightening portrait of the impact of COVID in Peel region. This is a very naive question and thought that comes to me. How does this perception of fear and potential reprisal, how does that get communicated at the workplace? So this is the very naive question. Where do migrant workers and where do other workers who have permanent residency, how do they come to get the idea that they can't speak out? You know, we're told we're living in a free country, that there's freedom of speech and protected in the charter. How do so many workers come to believe they do so at great risk to themselves?
So what I have heard from workers, and these are all like, I would say, firsthand experiences, workers have lost jobs, and especially migrant students, I've heard from, I would say, numerous of them, that their PR application was in the process when the employer just lets them go, because they did something at the workplace, or they stood up for their rights, or they addressed the health and safety conditions at their workplace, and they were let go. And in that process, they lost that support from employer, which is much needed for the processing of their permanent residency application. So after maybe almost when they were about to get their permanent status, they were just let go, and then they had to start all over again. And then it is very, I would say, there are, like, I'm a warehouse worker myself. I know how management conveys these messages indirectly. So there are times when people who speak up, they are put on, I would say, tougher assignments for the week. And where workers don't control these decisions, where workers don't have a say in how the work schedules are set up. So that time, employer has the full control of assigning all these job duties to workers, and they tend to punish those who stand up for the others. And I've noticed that all along in my, I would say, for 10, 12 years of job in a warehouse.
Kit and Deena, I couldn't help notice you nodding as Gagandeep was saying that. Is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of how does it come that workers become intimidated into exercising a right of voice, of speech that we assume is there for everyone to be exercised?
I mean, I think that we're disciplined as soon as we come into this country, to be honest. I think, and I'm talking about my family that came with permanent residency, right? But there's, I mean, the story of immigrants coming into this country and their skills and their experience not being recognized and being told that you have to have Canadian experience. And the fact that then the only jobs you're able to get are low wage jobs, and and then you're completely disrespected in the workplace, and that you're doing work that you never thought you'd ever do. And I think that, this whole story of, I think it's well known that people who are coming into the country have higher qualifications and higher technical skills than Canadian born. And yet all of that experience that comes into the country, all of the people that work on our farms, who drive our cabs, who work in our factories, who are doing personal support work, were, in professional capacities and in their own fields back home. But many of us are forced to come into this country for many issues in terms of what's been happening. But I think that there's ways in which you are disciplined. There's ways in which you're streamlined into certain jobs. And that is, I'm just saying that is for those folks who have status, right? Who have access to citizenship. And there is a clear message that is told to you that you be grateful that you've got a job. Don't speak up, otherwise even this job that you've got that pays minimum wage, it will be gone. And and then it disciplines you into then having to understand that that it's not just one job like that, but it's the whole place is like that, right? And so you try to go from job to job, and then you realize, well, better the devil I know than the devil I don't. And so then you stay, and then you sacrifice your life, and you say, okay, well, maybe my kids can do better than me. And that's the age-old story, right, that we're told. But I think what's changed fundamentally over the last sort of 20 or 30 years is that, whereas my family who came here, who were not business class or high immigrant professionals, doctors or anything like that. My dad was a car mechanic. My mom was an office worker. There was an ability, there was a pathway into this country where you could come in if you were working class, right? And that pathway has now gone. And all of those pathways are now, some of those pathways were never there. So if you were a farm worker, the pathway was never there. But for other sectors of work, whereas maybe working people could come into Canada and make it their home and actually land with like PR, those avenues are no longer there, right? I would not be able to, my family would not be able to come into this country right now. Like I would probably be coming in through one of the temporary foreign worker pathways. And so even though English is my first language, even though I grew up in England, like it's just impossible now. And so I think that, it's the combination of immigration laws and the intersection of labor laws that have become so weak over the last 40 years that it's a lethal combination that basically disciplines workers, and I would say disciplines unionized workers as well, to not speak up, to not organize, to not fight for more. And I think that lethal combination is something that everyone learns very quickly once they enter into this country. And I think for a lot of young workers, when they go into their first workplace, they're taught very clearly, like, oh, okay, so this is what it's like. Well, I don't know what my rights are, and I better shut up if I want to keep my rights. And so that's just, again, I would say, I think what Kit has to do in her organizing with migrant farm work is absolutely where there's not even that sense that you can even move from job to job, as they've said. So I'll pass it back to you, Kit.
Well, yeah, I did want to ask you, Kit. Deena made reference to the fact that workers come to learn and realize the limitations that are imposed on them. So maybe I'll put it this way: how long does it take a migrant worker coming to Canada to realize there are a lot of don'ts?
I think even before they enter the country, in their home countries, while they're doing the flight processing, they're told by their home governments, don't go up to Canada to make trouble, don't join any association. Some are even told, don't even go to church and, become part of the community. that's seen as a threat to the temporary foreign work program. Because if they start becoming part of the community, they learn, oh, this is not how it's supposed to be on the farms. And I just want to pick up on something that Gagandeep was saying as well, how their temporary status is weaponized by employers in order to keep them silent, keep them in fear, keep them in the dark. It's one thing to know your rights. It's one thing to have rights on paper. It's another thing entirely to have the power to assert those rights. And that's why farm workers are uniting with care workers, migrant students, undocumented workers to fight for permanent.
Oh, Kit, we can't hear you.
Used against workers.
Oh, there we go. Now
Yeah. Kit, we lost you a bit there, but it didn't remove your message. The message came through loud and clear. One of the things I'm struck by is the three of you get a lot of ink and airtime in the media. Like there's a fair number of stories about labor and work and COVID, where journalists are reaching out to you and quoting you. And I'm kind of curious, like, do journalists ask you for contacts with frontline workers? If they do you recommend that they speak to frontline workers, or are you protective of frontline workers? And reciprocally, when frontline workers come to your organizations to complain about the conditions they're working under, do you advise them to speak to the media? Do you caution them about that? How do you handle that interplay of what's the place of the frontline vulnerable worker in going public? How do you handle all that?
I mean, can I just say though that it may seem that we have a lot of ink right now, but it has never been. It's not always been that way. I mean, there's been many years where the press have not been interested in covering labor issues, and if they have, they would just traditionally go to, the unions and the union sort of leaders, right, as the key commentaries. And so I think that base, that sort of awareness has taken a lot of work on our part to develop relationships with journalists, to support focuses on labor, and to really kind of expose the broader issues of what labor is all about, and the fact that it's around immigration, and it's around poverty, and it's around not being able to afford affordable housing and childcare. And so that has been a product of a good 20 years of work to get to this spot where, people actually understand the connections. But yeah, we get calls all the time. And so absolutely, our first objective is to have workers speak themselves. But, there's two or three different types of calls you get, right? There's the journalist that calls you who says, I want a Muslim woman who has a disability, who's willing to let me come into her house, show her cupboards. And, if she's had an injury, that would be great. And so it's like poverty porn, right? It's like where the worker is sort of, the human interest, scandalous story, and like their agency, their ability to talk about policy solutions and about the kinds of changes that we need. They're not interested in covering those stories, right? They just want to, they've actually already gotten their expert. They've got their Stats Canada policy expert or their employment lawyer, and they just need like a brown face to put in front, and then their story is complete. So when I get calls from that, not interested. I'm not
basically an agent to sort of, you know, put out workers that way. So part of it is about understanding that, you know, all the workers that we have connected to us have demands, have changes that they want to see, and are not interested in just being public fodder for, oh my God, it's so terrible what's happening to those workers. So there's a navigation that you have to do, right? To sort of figure out, where is the person coming from? Is it that, you know, poverty porn and just that, you know, senseless sort of coverage? Or is there some integrity to the story? Is the reporter willing to talk to the worker about what changes that they'd like to see, and they're not just seeing them as a victim, that they're seeing them as someone who has agency and has a story to say that doesn't just involve how bad it is, but that the changes that they want to see. So part of that is that, and then there's the issue of how to protect a worker, that I take very seriously, because I just had a conversation today where someone just said to me, I can't afford to lose this job, right? And so that's the message and the responsibility that I have to talk to the reporter, to say, you have to have complete anonymity, right? Like, this person can't speak. If, you know, so it's difficult, it's a process. And I would say that the biggest issue is that, you know, workers won't speak out if they feel that you don't have their back, right? And that doesn't mean just the reporter, it actually means essentially the organization. And so, you know, and that takes years of building relationships, and about showing that you're not just in it for the quick story, but that you're in it to build something, to actually make some changes. And so what I've found is that it's easier to get workers to speak, and our job is to support workers to put their voices out, because they have a connection to the campaign. They know what their story is related to. They know what the end objective is. It's not just to have a human element story. So I think that it's complicated, but I think it's also, after years of experience, it is also very simple. And I think part of it is also just, you know, being really clear to the reporter what you're willing not to do, right? And you know, and what kind of situation you're putting people in. I don't know if you guys have had similar issues, Kit or Gagandeep, about, you know, reporters wanting a particular type of worker, and then, you know, not interested in actually, who you
They're looking for a casting agency. Yeah, it definitely, like Deena was saying, a lot of it is based on trust and how it fits into the overall strategy of the work. Is doing this interview going to move the work forward in a way that protects the worker? And these are really long and deep conversations that we have with the workers. And if they want to back out last minute, then we back out. And they know that. Every worker who speaks to the media is because they feel safe doing so, and that's based on years of relationship building.
Yeah, I would just further like to add that that we also have faced a similar problem in Peel region, and you know, like, our center has been quite in the media because of the 4 Amazon warehouses that our region has, and every media person is interested in talking with Amazon workers. And over this past year, we have tried to, you know, put the stories out of the workers who have suffered, who have felt the need to come out and speak up. But it was always based on the anonymity, because Amazon, as an employer, we know, has set you know, few examples for us how they treat the workers who have come out and openly and spoken against the company. So workers, but especially with Amazon warehouse workers, I have felt that the workers are not empowered enough, and they fear that employer will take the steps. And I think why this in this whole pandemic, this media attention has has been on the labor or the workforce. I think there's a bigger reason to that, because all along before this pandemic, things were different, quite different. But now I think as a society, we have realized that as long as these essential workers are not protected, nobody else is. So we have seen that this virus, how this virus travels, how this virus is transmitted. And as long as these low wage, precarious sector workers are not protected, none of us is. So I think that's a bigger reason why a lot of media is now trying to get to the stories of these workers, because I think we all want to be out of this pandemic. Nobody wants to stay. Maybe nobody before paid attention to these essential workers who are now titled as heroes. So I think now it is important that our society emphasizes on the importance of these workers, not only that they are the providers of nation or they fulfill our needs, but also that they hold an important place in this society, and their working conditions and the wages, they must also reflect all that.
Gagandeep, thank you for that. Kit, I'm reminded, of course, there have been instances of workers at significant public, personal risk going public about their stories. And there in Ontario, there was, a lot of interest and focus on one particular migrant farm worker, Gabrielle Flores, who went public and spoke out about the conditions, the likes of which had led to the death of 3 migrant farm workers last year. And we're now already learning that there have been fatalities again in the migrant agricultural sector. Can you tell us Gabrielle's story? What conditions was he working under, and what prompted him to speak out, and what did he say, and were there consequences to him speaking out?
Yeah, so Gabrielle worked at Scotland Farms, which is largely asparagus and other vegetables, mainly, as again, for export. But his situation is really not that extraordinary. I think we look for individual workers as heroes to hold up. But the conditions that him and his coworkers were going through at Scotland Farm were happening across the country at the same time, and were leading to increasing cases and death. And so when he spoke up about conditions, saying, we're going to get sick, he was disciplined. And one of his coworkers, actually his bunkmate, ended up passing away from COVID because workers' voices were ignored. And like Gagandeep was saying, we're not protected unless all of us are protected. And that's a message that workers have been learning through this pandemic. Yes, I might be targeted as an individual if I speak up, but I have a responsibility not only to myself, but to my coworkers, families, to speak up. This is a matter of life and death. It always has been. Farm work is some of the most dangerous work, more dangerous than policing. So it's always been a matter of life and death. But during this pandemic, it's really drawn the curtain back for a lot of farm workers to see, oh, it really is just us who need to take care of each other. The government's not looking out for us, either in Canada or from our home country. Our employer's not looking out for us. It's up to us to protect one another. And so while Gabrielle has been speaking out very publicly, unmasked, for every Gabrielle Flores, there are dozens of workers who are speaking up every single day. They're meeting together with their coworkers about issues they're going through on their farm. They're marching on their boss, demanding changes to housing and working conditions. So it is extraordinary, but at the same time, there are workers speaking up on every single farm, every single day.
You know, Deena, there was powerful evidence of that over the weekend when your organization, the Workers' Action Center, organized an online rally to promote workers' rights, and over 400 people attended that rally virtually. And there was one statement that one of the people who spoke and who themselves was a worker said that really gripped me. And she said, "No right is won by silence. No right is won by silence." So can you talk about that? Like, where does voice fit into the campaign for justice, equity, democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's ultimately, people talk about voice. We talk about it as building power, as about sort of organizing in sectors where, you know, workers are trying to be silenced. And I think part of it is, how do you build a space, or how do you build an approach that where workers feel that there are other options, that you know, I mean, there are workers who do it regardless. In fact, many workers come to us and say, I just took on my employer and I just did this and this and this and this, and this stuff has gone down, and like, I need some help to try and figure this out, right? So absolutely, there's so many fighters, and I think that's Kit's point is really important, is that there's so many people fighting back in all the ways that they can. And then there are those folks who have been beaten down by the system, right? To be really honest, and who have been just so disrespected in so many workplaces, and, you know, suffering so many issues, mental health issues, like trying to take it day by day. And then I think just working so many hours that it's just impossible to even think about sort of how do you even tackle that. So building, like, so for us, it's been about trying to build a space where we can support people to connect with others, because a lot of us come into this country and have no family, right? And have no community, have no connections, are isolated, are by ourselves, you know. And actually, one of the biggest things I know, a lot of people that we talk to on the phones, that one of their fears of getting sick is that they don't have anyone that can take care of them, right? They're by themselves, especially a lot of international students, a lot of people who have come here by themselves and have literally no one that would be able to support them if they got sick. And so, so you build a community, right? You build a community, you build a space to show that someone's got your back, that you know, an organization sees you, an organization is willing to fight alongside you if you're willing to fight. And then you also recognize, and I think one of the biggest things that we've done, which is, you know, built a lot of relationships, especially with a lot of undocumented workers in the past year, is, you know, we've had a food program, we've had income support, we've, you know, been supporting workers to leave bad workplaces, and that sometimes takes finances. And so we've been raising money, we've been trying to do everything we can to do what you would do if a family member came to you and said, I need support, right? And I think, so building that, I mean, a lot of our members talk about WAC as being part of a family. And I think that that's really important for many of us who have come to this country and who are very isolated. And so then part of feeling like you can be part of a collective that can fight back and not be silenced is about building that culture of organizing, that culture of connection, the relationships, the trust, the ability to sort of, you know, struggle together for what you want. And I think through struggle, you start to get a sense of what an organization is about, what a movement is about, how people work together, do people actually say what they mean? and then the ability to fight back against that silencing becomes more possible. And I think that that takes different amounts of time for different people. And there are some people that come in the door and are willing to, like, you know, bash it down and go for it. And then there are folks that I know that, you know, it's taken a couple of years to build those relationships, but that's what it's all about, right? It's about, you know, long-term organizing. It's about keeping your eyes on the prize, and it's about not being silenced, and about supporting people to fight back in whatever way that they want to, and that there's a space to do that. So yeah, so I think so for me, I know who said that quote, and it's a very powerful quote, and that person is incredible in terms of what they've gone through and the brutal process of job after job of being discriminated against, and yet they are fighting back, and they're not saying, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. And that is, to me, that is what hope is. Like, that's inspiration. That's what keeps, I think, all of us going.
Yeah, I like what you were saying about community, Deena, and how, like, community is very much a safety net, right? For those workers who maybe don't feel like they can speak up, having a community who will support them, whether or not they speak up, is in itself like a structure of support. And seeing what happens when workers do speak up, when there are reprisals and there is community support for that worker. Yeah. So, you know, when, for example, when Gabriel spoke up and there was reprisals, the worst of the worst happened to him, and he was supported and people rallied around him. And farm workers across the country saw that. So that taught them, even if I speak up, even if I'm fired, even if they threaten to send me home, there are people who will surround me and lift me up. And that's a role that all of us can play in our communities.
We're going to go to Q&A in a moment, but I want to give, for this stage of our discussion, a last word to Gagandeep. And I wonder, Gagandeep, and I'm thinking about what we've heard just now from Deena and Kit, what has made a difference for people, for workers in Peel and in Brampton? Is there something that has given them a greater resolve to act together and have their voices heard?
I would say that in the region of Peel, we are still in the process of building that power, because Peel region has been, I would say, ignored all along, because we have racialized workforce here, because we have diversity, and our center was launched, I would say, last January in 2020. And there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done for people in this region to come up and speak up and feel that power in them, to feel that momentum, to carry on that momentum at their workplaces. And we are trying, I would say, at our level best. And education, I think, all along is the key in this process. And we have switched from in-person classes to online classes to educate workers about just their basic rights, and not just only work-related issues, but issues that do play an important role in their lives outside workplace. So I would say that we have started, but there's a whole lot of work that still needs to be done.
Well,
and I do feel inspiration from the two panelists here. I'd see them that they have invested years of work into this organizing. And I guess, I have a lot to learn here.
As we all do from you, Gagandeep. So this has been a very rich and informative conversation, and we will continue it now in the form of questions from attendees. And at the control of our Q&A desk is Angie Holmes of the Center for Free Expression. So Angie, I haven't taken a peek myself. Do we have, are there questions that have come in?
Yeah, there is some. I do want to remind the attendees that you can use the Q&A button to ask a question. But the first question is a two-part question. It's for Gagandeep, and it's from Peggy. And Peggy says, how is the organizing going? Do workers believe now that their lives may depend on it? And the second part, did the failure of the Amazon drive in Georgia have any impact on the possibilities for warehouse workers here?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. Thanks for this question, Peggy. So the organizing work, I would say there's a lot of groundwork that still needs to be done before we can actually, start building that building of organizing on it. Like I just mentioned previously, that Peel region need to strengthen the roots here. Like we are trying to establish the roots here, and community support was discussed before in the discussion. And I believe community support is going to be very helpful and will play a key role in building the stronger roots in the region. So yes, workers are organizing, but I wouldn't say that they now feel that this is the last resort for them, because in this pandemic, where we have seen them suffer and struggle through the everyday crisis and dealing with the mental stresses that this pandemic has brought on us, there are workers who are still trying to come out of the financial difficulties that this pandemic has thrown upon them. There are workers in this region who have lost their whole life jobs, their career jobs, and now they are stuck working in these warehouses where they are not treated the same way maybe that they were treated at their job before. So many people are still in the process of accepting this new reality, that this could be their reality maybe for the rest of their lives, that they might end up working in an Amazon warehouse warehouse for the rest of their lives. So there are so many things, and there are people who are at different stages. Some are just thinking of this job to be just a temporary job until they find something better. Some are treating this job as a stepping stone for maybe getting hired into the company and getting something in a field that they have maybe studied back home. So there are different stages that every worker, I would say, is at. And now I think our job as organizers is to bring them all onto the same platform and then maybe start building from there onwards. And then the second part of the question, how the campaign in Georgia, I believe, I would say that hasn't really disheartened me. We do have, I would say, any failed campaign or any campaign that wasn't successful, I think we have a lot to learn from it. And I think our job as organizers is to carry on the work, regardless of what we come across in the way. So I guess there are always challenges. There will always be obstacles we will be facing, and we are living in this uncertain world. This pandemic has greatly, highlighted that for sure. We don't know what is going to come up tomorrow, but whatever it is, I believe workers are stronger than before. They are strengthened, and our job as organizers is to encourage them and to keep on that work.
Hear, hear.
Gagandeep, thank you for those powerful comments. Angie, have we got a next question online?
Yeah, the next one is what differences does it make for workers' ability to speak up about working conditions in warehouses, factories, retail, or farms if their workplace is unionized?
So, I mean, I can maybe take that, and I would, prefer if other panelists can pop into that, because I have worked in a unionized workplace where we had, I would say, a good collective agreement that protected our rights. But that doesn't mean that the employer will respect those rights. That doesn't mean that we had no issues or that our health and safety was prioritized by the employer. We had that extra, I would say, advantage that we had maybe that collective voice. We knew that we had backing from the elected executives, but still there is always a constant struggle between the workers and the management or the employer, because all employers, they care about the productivity. Safety is of least importance to them. As workers, we all have to work hard to make these employers understand that our safety matters, that our lives matter. And it is never easy. It is always, I would say, it's a path full of thorns. And as worker, doesn't matter wherever you are, you have to keep on walking on those.
I mean, I would say two things. I think one of the issues that's happening in unionized workplaces that I think needs to be really thought through by the unions is how and you've probably seen this, Gagandeep, is how employers are trying to undermine the collective agreement by opening up loopholes so that contract workers and temp agency workers can be used. And all of a sudden, you know, those summer students that we used in the summer become summer students and temp agency workers. And then it just starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so one of the things that I think would make a lot of unionized workplaces stronger is if the union, and it doesn't matter where you are, if it can gather all of those workers that are now no longer covered by the collective agreement and bring them into the collective agreement. And we've seen this really weaken workplaces, public sector and private sector. And then, you know, you just see it really undermining the ability of a union to actually negotiate. I think the second point that I would say is that I think that, you know, we do have to think about, you know, like unionization rates have kind of have declined, and we still don't even know the impact after the pandemic of what that means. We've heard many workers are interested in unionizing because they've realized that their employers really don't have their back during a pandemic. And so that's been really great. But then there's been a lot of companies that have been badly impacted and where jobs have been lost. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think the one thing that I've learned through doing the sort of 15 in Fairness campaign is that I think that when you have non-union and union workers working together, and where you have the community support of supporting higher standards, like a higher minimum wage, of things like, you know, decent hours, of status for now, a status for all, status for now. Yeah, we want it now and we want it for all. And you know, and sort of trying to, and if more of the community understands the connection of decent work and how it connects to them, and that they support that, what we've seen is that unions are able to negotiate better collective agreements because they're surrounded by a customer base, by a public who says, yeah, absolutely, there should be higher wages. Absolutely, people should have, you know, paid sick days. That should be part of every collective agreement. And so once you have that broader understanding to really support those negotiations that happen in a workplace, I think that everyone does better. And so I really think we have to sort of shake away our traditional notions of a union collective agreement by an employer with the workers in a specific workplace. I feel that because of, I mean, I felt this 20 years ago, but I feel it's even stronger now, is that, you know, the ability of workers to be able to organize and get a decent collective agreement is not just a workplace thing, it's a community thing, because it impacts everyone if everyone does well. And we see what happens when people don't do well, right? And this pandemic has shown that for sure.
Kit,
And for farm workers, they are banned from unionizing. This is not just migrant farm workers. If you or I got a job on a farm, we would not be able to unionize either. So having said that, workers do not need a union in order to organize and to act collectively, and they're doing so. We get this question a lot, you know, would unionization solve the problems? Not if they still had temporary status. Right. That's why the workers' #1 demand is permanent status for all, with nobody left behind. So it's great to see the unions supporting that demand so that they can show up for workers who are banned from unionizing too.
That might come as a shock to some, that farm workers aren't covered by labor legislation, don't have protections of rights to unionize. Again, maybe my role has been to ask the naive questions. How can that be? that group is barred from such rights?
Well, when you look at who's working in the farms, it's mostly, working class racialized workers, so they feel like they can get away with it. And along with being banned from unionization, they're left out of the most basic labor standards: minimum wage, maximum hours of work, rest periods, and this is, again, one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, and they're left out completely. So, Deena and Workers Action Center and the Justice for Workers campaign is so great in lifting that floor so that conditions are improved for everyone.
Angie, is there a next question?
Yeah, the next one, somebody says that the pandemic is undoubtedly affecting the lives of everyone currently in Canada. Do you also see some current or future positives for underprivileged workers which may arise from the current situation?
I mean, we certainly intend to sort of use the pandemic to push for the kinds of protections and legislation and rights that workers want. I hope that that's sort of growing public consciousness around essential work and about that connection between what happens to the grocery store worker and the cleaner has a direct impact on me. So I hope that consciousness will lead to an increased, stronger public support, and we're already seeing it. Recent polls show that over 83% of the public support paid sick days. That's grown from even 2 years ago, where we had 66%. So I think, the notion of paid sick days, which, again, 2 years ago was sort of seen as some sort of luxurious standard, is now become a situation where most people in the community would say, of course you should have 10 paid sick days. That just completely makes sense. And I think that it's our job to expand that to an understanding of, the fact that people should have decent hours, that they shouldn't have to juggle 2 or 3 jobs and work, 80 to 100 hours a week to make ends meet. Like, one job should be enough, so those kinds of sort of principles of decent work I absolutely think that there is an appetite out there. There is public support, and I think it's our job to galvanize that and make a difference with that in the legislation.
Gagandeep, how is that looking from your vantage point? Is there any silver lining or momentum that's coming out of this?
I mean, I've noticed now people recognizing those couriers who deliver the goods straight to their homes. I have seen people talk about these warehouse workers who are packing their orders so that, people can just self-isolate at home. People with high-risk conditions who have been recommended from the beginning to just stay home, not go out if not needed. So they are now relying on these workers for their day-to-day basic necessities. And I think people have come to that realization that the contribution that these workers have, especially in this pandemic, played all along. And I am definitely certain about that, like Deena mentioned, there's a larger public support around supporting these workers, around providing these workers with the basic benefits such as paid sick leave. I think paid sick leave should be made as a human right in a pandemic. So I've heard people talk about, and I think workers, they are also noticing that they don't really think of themselves as heroes, but they do know that society at present is relying on them.
Interesting. Kit, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize how worker organizing has grown during this pandemic. We started out organizing with farm workers in the Niagara region, where I'm based, organizing with my neighbors. And since COVID hit, we started doing a hotline. Now we have what we call base groups. These are groups of workers who meet together regularly on their farms and their bunkhouses. Now we have base groups in multiple provinces, and that would have never been possible in previous circumstances. So workers are really seeing, the clear signs. It's up to us to protect us. No one else is going to do it for us. And I see my internet connection is unstable, so I'll end it there.
No, you've come through very clearly. Angie, have we got other questions on to be posed?
Yeah, there's a few more. The next one is from Leo. And Leo says, has the Ontario legislation recognizing an employee's right to quit work when the conditions become unsafe been of any assistance in these circumstances? And how can it be improved?
I mean, actually, the government has made it more difficult. So they've taken away the ability for workers to argue constructive dismissal under employment standards. And so if a worker is going back to work after being laid off and the conditions of work have changed, even their wages have gone down. Let's say they were making 20 bucks an hour, now they're making 17. They used to get 35 hours of work, now they're getting 25. And if a worker wants to argue that those conditions have made it untenable for them to stay and that they've been in fact constructively dismissed because the working conditions have changed so much, that actually is not allowed under employment standards. And so that right has been taken away from workers during this pandemic. So in fact, this government has actually made it more difficult for workers to challenge unfair working conditions, and are in fact supporting employers, and of course, some employers are going to find it difficult to have people come back to work, but there are other employers that are absolutely making hand over fist of money right now and profit, and are doing incredibly well. But are also changing working conditions and wages and making it very difficult for workers. So we're not really seeing much movement from our esteemed Premier and Labour Minister.
I wonder, as a follow-up to that, the provision in the Occupational Health and Safety Act for the right to refuse unsafe work, has that been tried out, exercised as a grounds for not having to report to work? Gagandeep?
I can just quickly give. Deena, please go ahead.
No, go ahead, Gagandeep.
I would just like to give an example about the right to refuse. Just today, I was actually handling a case with a worker who is now disciplined because there was a mass refusal at work due to the unsafe working condition. And since that worker was speaking out on behalf of all the workers of the section of the shift, because apparently there's not everybody will be the one taking a lead on that. We know that we have workplace leaders who have the ability to speak up. And now with this pandemic, when everyone at work is wearing masks and all, people tend to kind of hide sometimes behind, and they have one person, okay, this person is going to address the issue on behalf of all of us. And now what happened? Management has given them 24-hour notice. They are about to discipline that person. And the situation was such that all the employees of the section, they were just requesting one simple request, that because one supervisor was tested positive, they were just requesting that the other supervisors should isolate, because they have witnessed those other supervisors standing in closer proximity with the infected one, they were not practicing social distancing at workplace. All the workers were only requesting that others also should isolate and get tested, and they should not be on the work floor. So for that, there is now a disciplinary interview waiting for the one worker, not all, just the one worker who was speaking on behalf of the others. So
And was
that's
that in a
how,
unionized workplace?
yes.
Yes. So that's in a
So
unionized
this is a
workplace.
unionized workplace, yes.
Yeah, so in a non-union workplace, like it's a whole different story, right? Around a refusal to work. And in fact, when you look at sort of the process of what's involved in a refusal to work, it's not that easy. You have to phone the Ministry of Labor. You have to stay on the job site or in close proximity. And so you can just imagine sort of what workers have to go through in order to sort of, you know, stay in those conditions. You know, I had a worker who phoned last year in the height of the the first wave, where they were going to spray the factory where they were working, and they weren't even going to let the workers leave. So they were going to disinfect and spray the workplace while workers were working, not let them leave, and that they had to continue. And so it wasn't until the worker actually threatened to go to the media that they actually then sent them home for 4 hours while they sprayed the workplace. But this was, you know, and so in those moments, right, you know, this sort of right to refuse, and even health and safety committees, like during the pandemic, most health and safety committees are not even functioning right now because workers aren't even able to meet together. And that's in unionized workplaces, let alone non-unionized workplaces. So, you know, there really is an issue. Like it always comes back to, how is the union supporting workers to organize and to take that collective energy? And then for non-unionized workers, it's about what kind of risk are they willing to take in terms of putting their lives, jobs, ability to stay in Canada on the line, and what, you know, and how can we support them to do that, you know? But in a lot of situations, even before the pandemic, the right to refuse is a bit of a joke, to be honest.
That's
Yeah,
a lot.
and for farm workers, you know, how do they even know that number exists? What number do they call? They don't even know that's an option. But what I've seen from workers is when there are conditions that are unsafe, they have sit-down strikes. They meet together and they decide, we're going to stop work until you fix the problem. So that gets things done much quicker than calling a government phone number, but at much greater risk. But when it is a matter of their health and safety, you know, they're willing to take that risk.
So there have been those kinds of stoppages.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's interesting.
There have been since the program began in the mid 1960s.
Well, there have been, I would say, numerous that I actually underwent when when I worked in a warehouse. But and I worked in a unionized warehouse, and I was threatened, I would say intimidated, bullied into just accepting that everything is all good, that there's nothing wrong, just go back to workplace or just go home. That was what was told to me over and over. So and then imagine a non-unionized worker where they have no job security, where they could be just let go, and just imagine them exercising this right. I think it's a very tough position, tough spot to be in, and I think at that stage we will be expecting a lot out of that worker, because we are not providing them with that background support. We are just giving them this right, hey, use it, and then just get shot.
We're just about approaching our end time. So Angie, I wonder maybe if there are remaining questions, if they can be bundled and ask the panelists to offer brief replies.
Yeah, or we can come back for another one after. I'll ask this
Okay.
next one.
Okay.
The next one, Kit, you said that there are workers on farms who are speaking up regularly about the challenges they and their fellow workers are facing. Most of us hear almost nothing about this in the traditional media. Do you have any suggestions about where we can find news about workers' efforts for better and safer workplaces? I think that question can go to the others too.
Yeah.
As well.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of organizing work that happens on the farms is out of the public eye, out of, you know, that's just strategic. And that's what Migrant Workers Alliance for Change is focusing on. It's migrant-led organizing. So you won't hear about it in the media. It's happening though.
But people could sign on to the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change blog, and
that's a great idea, Deena. You can support migrant organizing at migrantrights.ca. We're actually doing a phone zap today to Justin Trudeau. They're announcing a new permanent residency pathway program tomorrow that will leave most of our members out. So we're asking people to use our call tool to zap the Prime Minister and let him know that that migrant workers have support and there are people standing alongside with them for status for all. Thanks, Deena.
No, and I just wanted to say, because you're being so modest, is that there's some incredible reports that if people want to check out that are exactly on this organizing. So there's the care workers behind the closed door, which has care workers from across the country speaking out about the conditions that they faced during the pandemic. And then there was a report that was done, and I'm forgetting the name, Kit.
Oh, yes. Unheeded Warnings was a report done based on calls we got to our hotline during the first few months of the shutdown. So that's available on migrantworkersalliance.org.
Yeah, so and basically I think one of the things is sort of the incredible kind of trying to put out those stories, but do it from a worker-centered perspective. So I mean, I think, you know, MWAC and MRN, and then you can also check out the Workers Action Center and the Justice for Workers campaign as well, where again, trying to really support those stories to come forward, and, you know, so that you're able to get that direct access.
Angie?
Yeah, I'll actually group those last two together.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, how is it that COVID policies are distorted by businesses to protect the company rather than their workers? And then somebody else is asking, which can be grouped in, is there anything that can be done to reconcile the products and services made by workers and the corporate wealth generated, whether it's like remittance matching programs by the companies or government?
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Gagandeep.
I just want to add a bit that COVID policies, how they have favored, I would say, businesses, because now we are in a strict stay-at-home order in our region as well as in Toronto region. But there are still warehouses that are open that are actually making non-essential supplies. There are warehouse workers who are packing non-essential supplies, because apparently these employers have somewhat of a control over government, because government never implemented these orders in a way that would have made proper sense. For some workers, these stay-at-home order mean nothing, because they will be going to work and they will be putting themselves at risk. So I believe those COVID policies are there, but definitely businessmen, they have been able to distort them all along.
I mean, I would just say employees can be incredibly creative at getting around the laws because they have all the power in the workplaces. And so part of it is organizing is the answer, I believe. And I think it's about ensuring that the legislation that we have is is effective, that workers can actually use it, and that it actually can be enforced. And I think that those are critical components in terms of trying to sort of take on the kind of corporate profit that we are seeing being made during this pandemic, which is absolutely astronomical for some of the companies.
Kit, last word to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, under the current system of capitalism, that's such an imbalance of power between employers and workers. And like Deena was saying, the only way to correct that imbalance is through organizing. So, even if you're not involved with, you don't work at a warehouse or on a farm, maybe you live in an apartment building, you can organize with other tenants there. There's a lot of community organizing going on right now. So I just want to encourage everyone to get involved where you are, with your neighbors, with your coworkers, and together, it works.
Yeah.
Well, I will momentarily turn things back to Jim Turk as Executive Director of the Center for Free Expression. But I just have to say, what a rich and powerful conversation this has been. And it leaves me thankful that you each are where you are, doing the incredible work that you're doing. So typically I would thank you and I do appreciate you being here for this hour and a half, but I'm mindful this is a 24/7 commitment that each of you has to the work that you're doing. And for that, I thank you. And I will now turn things back to Jim Turk for wrap up.
I'd like to join Myer in thanking the three of you for a really engaging and informative discussion. And I want to thank Myer for his wonderful skills as a moderator. I think you all did a super job. I would like to also thank the audience for being here today, and remind everyone that a recording of video podcast to this will be uploaded onto the Center for Free Expression website tomorrow. So if you have any friends or colleagues who you'd like to be able to see this discussion, you can go to our website, which is cfe.ryerson.ca, and see it. Our next event is going to be quite a different one. The title is Demise of School Libraries, Consequences and Options. School libraries and teacher librarians who give them life are really disappearing due to education budget cuts. But the cost of this for current and future generations of students in a world awash with misinformation, and where skills to think critically are more important than ever, are being endangered. So we're going to have a very interesting panel of librarians and others who thought a lot about this, discussing this and what can be done. This panel will be a week today, Wednesday, will be 2 weeks from today. Do I have this right? I think it's, yes, a week from today. I'm sorry. It is going to be a week from today. I've lost track of time. This actually is May 5th. It'll be Wednesday, May 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And the information about it and the Zoom link are all on the Center for Free Expression website. Again, cfe.ryerson.ca. The following week, we'll be beginning a new Center for Free Expression series entitled Taming Big Tech, Exploring the Alternatives. Our first conversation will feature award-winning author, journalist, and blogger Cory Doctorow, who has worked at the Electronic Freedom Frontier Foundation, is an MIT Media Lab research affiliate, and is a visiting professor of computer science at the Open University. So for more information about any of these events and other upcoming events, as well as podcasts of previous events, go to our website, cfe.ryerson.ca. Thank you all for joining us today. Goodbye.